Hi, I'm going to read chapter 18, but before I do, I'd like to say that one of the reasons I wrote this book was to put a stop to all the second guessers. I've had so many people ask over and over again why I did this and why I did that, and what were the reasons for my decisions. The second guessers, very typically, why didn't you leave your wife when you had 2 children? Why didn't you leave your wife when you had 3? Why didn't you leave when you had 4? And the reason was that I always assumed that by doing so, terrible results would ensue. And if not for me, for her, or especially mostly for the children, I never wanted to break up the family, and I always knew there would be terrible consequences if I did. And people don't seem to realize this, but the expression is, the proof in the pudding is in the eating. And you really don't know what's going to happen until you actually do something and the consequences follow. Ideas like, what were you thinking when you did this? It's good to think things through, but sometimes the best laid plans, I don't have to tell you. Things happen that are beyond your control, not that you were intended, and it's not the consequences of your actions necessarily as it's the consequences of circumstances. So I'm going to read this chapter, and it's chapter 18, The Philosophy of Raising Your Kids. In the Coney 2012 film, at about minute 16, the man says, "The greatest thing you can give your child is to make them independent." I wanted my children to be independent. Stacy wanted them to be dependent, not just on her, but on licenses and society for the legitimization of their lives. One of the most important things that I could recommend to a couple who wishes to raise a family is know your spouse's childhood. In my family, there was no drinking of alcohol. We had very little of it in our house, and what we did have was gathering dust in the back of a kitchen cabinet. I dated a girl in high school who I picked up at her house for a date. When I came to her home, her mother was asleep on the couch. I did not understand that she was passed out drunk. I had no experience with this from my own childhood. The girl, on the other hand, was so used to this that she was not even embarrassed. I asked, "What's with your mother?" The girl responded, surprised with the question, "She's sick." I didn't even put the story together until the next day. The point is, you know what experience teaches you. I did not experience life with a drunken parent. I grew up with 4 sisters and a brother. Each of us was fully independent at an early age. My parents were helpful and supportive, but if you wanted money, you earned it. If you needed to go somewhere, you organized your own ride. I always had a job and hitchhiked to West Orange, Montclair, and to school without hesitation. Even hitchhiked to Asbury Park once. That is, until I was 17 and bought my own car. Though the world had changed since my childhood, I basically had no reason to imagine that my children wouldn't take charge of themselves as I had. This self-reliance was so natural for me that anything else was really beyond my imagination. It was an issue that I really didn't need to consider. I was certainly never a tough guy, but I was always tough enough. Kids who had curfews, whose parents were always there to pick them up or send them off with snacks, those kids sometimes characterized me as a wildcat. I would leave a town at 10 o'clock at night and walk home. No problem. One night I left a friend's house in West Orange to go home. When his father found out, he came after me in a car and drove me home. I was happy to have the ride, but didn't understand his motive. My parents were equally surprised by his gesture. We just said, "Oh well," and I kept on trucking. My wife was always a walker. In high school, she would walk on her own to Brookdale Park, which was about 3 miles from her home. It seemed to me that she had the same self-reliant attitude towards herself that I had. She was disconnected, or wished to be disconnected, from her parents' apron strings, which I considered to be normal. Her parents wished to control her destiny, which I felt was tyrannical. When we met, I was a free man, even though I was living at home with my family. She wanted to be the same. I had lived on my own for 2 years before that time. I told her that I would take an apartment and that she could move in with me and start her adult life. To me, if you didn't go to college, this was what you did. To me, it was as natural as eating. I couldn't imagine why it wouldn't be obvious to anybody. The resentment of Stacy's parents of me seemed to me to be a shortcoming on their part. It seemed to be a denial of natural process, and a little bit creepy. I just thought that they were a couple of stupid drunks who had no life of their own, who perhaps needed Stacy and her brother to validate their existence together. They were not a couple. They slept in separate rooms, actually on separate floors of their home, and didn't speak to each other for years. Stacy's father was relegated to the basement. They were a sad family. Stacy had the fortitude of youth. I thought her gumption was forever. Well, it wore off in 2 years. My sisters and brother went straight out of high school and conquered the world. I can't tell you how proud and impressed I am with each and every one of them. A doctor, a lawyer, an international correspondent, 2 business managers who have incredible success with their hobbies as well as their business endeavors are what they are. They put themselves through school and never looked back. That is what I wanted my children to do. I wanted them to find their own way to independent adulthood. I wanted my children to use their own mind to create an image of what they wanted to be in their life and find a path to make their dream come true. I found that my wife and I had a philosophical difference on this issue. My wife wanted them to select a pre-designed path that was secure from conflict and have them roll down it safely to their grave. I enjoyed creating my identity and proving myself as a man among my peers. Stacy's goal was anonymity. My greeting was, "Fred's here, let the party begin." Stacy's greeting was, "Hello, it's just me." I was a product of my family. Stacy was a product of hers. This philosophical clash eventually caused Stacy to feel protective of her parents, especially her dad. She knew how I felt about them, and her brother. Having a spouse that disapproves of your family is hard to take. Stacy knew that her family wasn't a pillar of strength, but they were hers. She appreciated the love that they did give in the way that they gave it. Make no mistake about it, she did cut them out of her life a number of times. She did try to reunite with them as her heart softened. After having each child, I remember my son Fitzy having a hard time not seeing his maternal grandmother after one particular conflict. This philosophical clash was too much for Stacy to handle in her life. She was not from my family and was afraid of them. They were too strong, too self-assured. She was afraid that if her children became as they were, she would not be able to control them. I didn't want to control them. Stacy and I, parenting in the same house could never work. Her fear caused her to have every reason to disapprove of me and mine, and she expressed this at every turn. My sisters and brother always wanted to be more involved with me and my family, but to relieve Stacy of the burden of their visits, I didn't encourage it. The exception was my mom. Stacy had a warm relationship with her for 20 years, but when my mother supported me in my conflict with Stacy, Stacy ended it cold. Please realize, my mother didn't support me against Stacy. She simply made sure I had a place to live. Not only did Stacy end her relationship with my mom, she demanded that our children do the same. I remember Fitzy being choked up as he sadly said goodbye forever to his grandmother for the last time. I had listened on an extension phone. Just imagine how I felt. There are volumes written on the evil of alienation, and I will write about it as applies in a later chapter. Philosophically, there is no right way to raise kids. Ethnic and religious groups, etc., have different ways. When they are yours, the right way is your way. They're your own flesh and blood. It's right of every parent to raise his and her kids. I did allow Stacy to raise her kids her way. She did not allow me to raise mine my way. She demanded that as I participate, that I would do it her way. That's wrong. My children were cheated. I was bullied. Do not fall into the trap of thinking of me as a wimp for allowing Stacy to dominate our domestic situation. In a modern marriage, a man cannot put his foot down against a woman who does not love him. If he does, the legal system will be employed and they will make sure he loses very badly. This is proven because when I finally did, my wife callously destroyed my life. I'll be back again soon with chapter 19. Ironically, it's a chapter about equal rights. I certainly never received any. I'm Fred Satilli. This is Hotsy Totsy Feminazi. The Straight Story. Thanks for watching.